Did you know that an American who's playing ETS2 for the very first time could be in for a pretty big shock? Why does something as simple as a roundabout feel so unnatural? And how come these traffic signs have zero text on them? Are you actually supposed to remember what all these symbols mean? At the same time, Europeans jumping into ATS are often just as mind blown by how different American trucking really is. So I asked players from both sides of the Atlantic what actually broke their brains when they first switched between the games. Because while ETS2 and ATS are pretty much identical in terms of design, switching between them can feel like a complete culture shock. Let's start with some road rules that can feel really wrong at first. One of the biggest sources of confusion are the traffic lights. In America, you're usually allowed to make a right turn even if the light is red after a complete stop. In Europe, however, a red light just means stop with no exceptions whatsoever. If you try to run it, you're gonna get a pretty hefty fine. So when you switch, that simple difference is already gonna start messing with your confidence right away. And I gotta say, I still remember the first time I played ATS and took that right turn on a big red light. It felt like I was doing something illegal, like a true outlaw. Besides that, the traffic light color code is slightly different as well. In Europe, there's always that yellow phase between the red and the green. One American player wrote about how he thought it was actually a glitch at first, until he realized that's just how the lights work here. And it actually makes sense, especially back when most people in Europe drove manuals. That extra moment on yellow gave you enough time to get it into gear before moving off. And while we're still talking about traffic lights, even their positioning is completely different. This one is actually a win for Americans in my opinion. Having the light on the far side of the intersection just makes more sense. You can always see it in front of you, even with those big American sun visors. In Europe, they're right next to you, and the moment you roll past the white line, you just cannot see them anymore. Maybe that's intentional to force you to stop a bit earlier, but still, having them in front of you just feels more practical to me. And then, there's something that an American friend of mine likes to call the arch nemesis of American drivers: roundabouts. They're designed to keep the traffic flowing, and while they're starting to appear more and more in the United States and most Americans are getting familiar with the concept, in Europe they're already everywhere, like literally everywhere. Watching an American player jump into something like Nordic Horizons DLC and hit 5 of those in a span of 3 minutes, it's probably a pretty funny reaction to witness. When you're out driving on a public road, one of the most basic things that you rely on are the traffic signs. And that sounds simple enough until you switch between the two games, because there's a fundamental difference in how they communicate with you. In the US, it's all very text-based. You'll often see signs literally spelling things out like "slow vehicles keep right." In Europe though, it's almost the opposite. It's all symbols and icons that can differ from one country to another, and there's like a lot of them. As a fun fact, while many are standardized under the 1968 conventions of road signs and signals, individual countries can still have variations. With countries like Germany featuring over 1,000 distinct signs, you get the picture. It's really hard to remember them all, especially if it's the first time you're seeing them. So if you're an American jumping into ETS2, good luck. But it goes both ways, because while written signs are clear and leave no room for interpretation, European players playing ATS are not used to reading instructions while driving. They're used to just looking at a sign and instantly understand what it means. If you're a European playing ATS for the first time, I hope you brought your reading glasses, because you're going to need them. Now let's be honest, we can't really talk about culture shocks without talking about the trucks themselves. American and European trucks are fundamentally different by design. From the obvious cab over versus long hood, to smaller details you only notice when you start driving. One of the biggest things players notice right away is visibility. Americans jumping into ETS2 are often surprised by just how much they can actually see from the inside the cab. But of course that also goes both ways. Europeans stepping into an American truck can feel a bit blind. Between the long nose, the mirrors, even the huge stack pipes, it can almost feel like you're looking at the world through a really small window. And then there's the interior. One American player pointed out how different European trucks feel on the inside. ATS trucks have that classic old school analog vibe. And when you switch to ETS2, they feel a lot more modern, clean, almost more advanced, even when compared to some of the latest American rigs. But of course, that comes down to the personal taste, because at least to me, no matter how much tech you add, there's something about that old school feel you only get from a good old Kenworth or a Peterbilt. And beyond how they look, the way they drive is also just as different. European trucks feel sleek, efficient and easy to maneuver, especially in tight spaces. American trucks, on the other hand, feel massive, powerful, but not exactly easy to master. And combine that with the reduced visibility inside the cab, it can quickly turn into a challenge for ETS2 players, especially when it comes to parking. After playing for a while, no matter from which continent, players start to notice some more deeper differences. Besides the trucks or the signs, the entire road systems behaves differently. In ATS, highways with really high speed limits will often take you straight to smaller towns, and while the speed limits might be high on paper, you'll spend a lot of your time just trying to reach them. An ETS2 player noted how 90% of the time they were constantly flooring it just trying to reach that speed limit, and by the time they did, they had to either stop or slow down, rinse and repeat. The size of American cities makes it a real hassle for most Europeans to be able to leave them behind. Even when turning on red, you'll spend a good amount of time trying to clear towns like LA. In Europe, you can often skip the cities by going around them, and while the speed limits are much lower, they are easy to reach, and that makes the driving feel a bit more consistent. One American player pointed out how flabbergasted he was by driving on the German Autobahn. Since the car and truck speed limits have such a big discrepancy, he felt like those AI traffic cars were flying past while he was stuck driving at 80 per hour. In ATS, traffic moves at a more similar pace, and you're not constantly being overtaken at high speeds. So while those differences won't hit you in the first 10 minutes of gameplay, they will be a big part of why you have that strange feeling when switching between the games. And then there are smaller details, the kind of things you don't really think about until they catch you off guard. Something as simple as turn signals, for example. In the US, they're often red, combined with the brake lights, which can be confusing at first if you're used to separate amber lights used in Europe. Or the lack of toll booths in ATS. After dealing with them constantly in ETS2, suddenly not having to slow down or pay every now and then, it almost feels strange, but in a good way, of course. The wait stations are also gonna make a difference. They were mentioned by quite a few players, and after a few jobs you complete, you'll find just how many of those exist in the US compared to Europe. Gas stations, for example. They serve the same purpose in both games, but my god, they are different. I was surprised and I really fell in love with the concept of the long-haul diners, huge parking lots that feel like a trucker's paradise in terms of food, amenities and comfort. They're small things, some funny, some strange, but they're the kind of details that remind you just how different we really are when it comes to trucking. And what I love most from experiencing both games is realizing that no region is perfect. Certain things, as strange as they may be, they just make a lot more sense even if you're not used to them right away. Imagine trucking in Europe that has 0 toll booths, and gas stations big enough so there's always an empty spot available. Or imagine trucking in the US with more modern trailers or more roundabouts meant to fluidize the traffic. If you enjoy this type of content, you can support me by liking the video and maybe subscribe. Around 80 to 90% of you watching right now are not subscribed yet, and it makes me wonder, what could I do better to win you over? No matter where you're coming from, trucking in a new continent will always be a fun experience, even if it comes down at a cultural shock at first. And as always, until the next time, stay safe on the road and keep on trucking. Cheers.